You are now listening to Mark's Unexplained World by Mark the Medium. Available on Apple Podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon Prime, Podbean and most other podcast platforms. Tonight's episode is about Joseph Denny at Dartmoor Prison. So it's over to you now, Mark, for this week's incarcerated story.
Joseph Denny, whose alias was George Adolphus Gordon, was a coloured native of Barbados who, due to him wearing glasses which presented a kind and gentle appearance, was portrayed as having bright, perceptive characteristics. However, like all books that have an eye-catching cover, what you see is not necessarily what you get, and beneath that intelligent look and benign appearance, Joseph Denny was in fact described as a habitual criminal who at times would resort to violence. His first term behind bars was at Carmarthen Prison in Carmarthenshire, built on the site of the old castle, where he served 6 months for housebreaking. And then he was sentenced to 7 years in Liverpool jail for manslaughter, which was then followed by a term of 8 years in Dartmoor Prison for the crime of felony. During Joseph Denny's term at Dartmoor, there were 124 breaches of discipline that were recorded against him, which resulted in Denny receiving various forms of punishment, which included solitary confinement, along with long spells of a restricted diet. And on top of that, he was also due to be flogged. However, on account of his poor health, this was not carried out. According to the Times newspaper on the 5th of February in 1881, Joseph Denny said, whilst incarcerated, and I quote, "Why don't you send me to the gallows right away? I shall be sure to do something. I shall commit murder before I'm done." Greetings, Unexplainers. Thank you once again for tuning in to listen to what's recently been described as the oral equivalent of the Rubik's Cube, or otherwise known as Mark's Unexplained World. My name is Mark Hughes. I'm a medium, a ufologist, a true crime buff, and a man with a very dark and disturbed sense of humour who, when his only tool is a hammer, all his problems start looking like nails. But just to give you a better idea of who I am and what I do, every week, usually on a Tuesday night, though occasionally on a Wednesday, allowing for bank holidays and busy weekends, I do a podcast on the many wide and various subjects that fall under the Unexplained banner. These include ufology, hauntings, disasters, and all sorts of other paranormal phenomena, including true crime, unsolved crime, serial killers, missing people, and various other stories that deserve some attention. So, if you are listening to this show on YouTube, please give us a review or an opinion of the episode subject that I can reply to, a thumbs up, and subscribe to my channel. Or, if you are listening on any other podcast platforms, again, give us a like and a follow. In this episode, I'm going to tell you about what some might say cruel story surrounding Joseph Denny at Dartmoor Prison. And this week's necessary disclaimer. Well, this story is a tale that sadly involves details of racism and people being tortured, so it may prove upsetting to some. You listen at your own discretion. Also, all opinions and comments are strictly my own, but the facts of the case remain. I also apologise if I pronounce anything incorrectly. My English, although it is my first and only language, always remember, artificial intelligence is no match for natural stupidity. Anyway, let us get back to the story at hand. Before I go into the Joseph Denny story, I thought for part 1 of the show it would be interesting to just look at a potted history of Dartmoor Prison itself. HM Prison Dartmoor is what is known as a Category C male prison, meaning that it houses inmates who cannot be trusted in open conditions, but who are unlikely to try to escape. It is located, with its high granite walls dominating the area, on Princetown High, Dartmoor, in the English county of Devon, with it being owned by the Duchy of Cornwall, which is currently Prince William, who is also the Duke of Cornwall, and is operated by His Majesty's Prison Service. The building itself was designed by the English architect and engineer Daniel Asher Alexander, and started its construction by local labour in 1806. In all, it took nearly 3 years to complete the build. Over the years, Dartmoor Prison has been used to house a variety of prisoners, which include French inmates and American sailors, with a recent examination of the General Entry Book of American Prisoners of War at Dartmoor by the British historian and author Nicholas Guyot, revealing that, and I quote, 829 sailors of colour have been entered into the register by the end of October 1814. By 1920, Dartmoor Prison began housing UK criminals and would, over time, develop a reputation for housing some of Britain's most serious offenders that included murderers, gangsters, thieves, spies and robbers such as the English criminal Jack the Hat McVitie, the Jewish gangster Jack Spot Comer, the acid bath murderer John George Haig and the mad axeman Frank Mitchell. And, as with the situation in most penitentiaries around the world, there were of course numerous attempts to escape from the prison, which then led to massive manhunts by the police and prison services. On the 24th of January in 1932, the prison's tough conditions eventually led to its worst outbreak of violence, with the cause of the riots being generally attributed to prisoners' perceptions to the poor quality of the food that was being served to them, along with the suspicion that the food had been tampered with. Dartmoor Prison continued to suffer from its age, and in 2001 a Board of Visitors report not only condemned its sanitation, but it also highlighted a list of other urgently needed repairs, and in 2002 the Prison Reform Trust warned that the prison itself might be breaching the Human Rights Act of 1998 due to its severe overcrowding. But just a year later, the Chief Inspector of Prisons declared that the building had made substantial improvements to its management and regime. And so, in the October of 2019, it was announced that Dartmoor Prison would close its doors permanently in 2023. However, in the December of 2021, it was confirmed that, following negotiations with the Duchy of Cornwall, it would remain open beyond 2023 and for the foreseeable future. In 2023, 96 inmates of Dartmoor Prison had to be evacuated from the building due to the region, which included the prison itself, being contaminated by a hazardous radon gas, which was generated by the decay of uranium in both the region's bedrock and in the prison walls. But according to one source, no inmates or staff were said to have suffered with any adverse health effects from any radon poisoning at Dartmoor Prison, although this has been heavily disputed. On an interesting side note here, radon is a chemical element which is a radioactive gas and is both colourless and odourless, with epidemiological studies showing a clear association between breathing high concentrations of radon and incidence of lung cancer. And whilst radon is the second most frequent cause of lung cancer, it is the number one cause amongst non-smokers. However, significant uncertainties exist for the health effects of a low-dose exposure. And again, as recently as 2024, 682 prisoners from Dartmoor were transferred to other prisons due to the repeated unsafe levels of radon. And the prison itself closed for radon mitigation. And, while the closure of the prison was stated to be temporary, there has been no planned reopening date ever announced as yet. Radon concentrations of 14 times the permissible limit had been recorded in the prison, and in 2025, about 500 inmates and staff, many of whom attributed serious health problems, including cancers linked to radon, were planning to sue the Ministry of Justice. Dartmoor Prison was actually given a Grade 2 heritage listing back in 1987. After this first short break, in part 2 we will look at the multiple arrests of Joseph Denny and the time he decided to break in to Dartmoor Prison. And yes, you did hear me correctly.
This show is brought to you courtesy of Neil Packer and the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre. Find them online at www.hauntedresearchcentre.com or at 9 to 11 Regent Street, Hinckley, LE10 1AW. Open on Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. for guided tours of the haunted rooms at just £3 per person. Booking is essential at all times, and over 16s only, please, unless accompanied by an adult. The haunted rooms are extremely haunted, and paranormal activity could and has taken place at any time. Some areas and particular objects or items can be quite scary and unnerving. Membership is available for £25 to qualify for selective offers. And why not download the app, available on both iOS and Android, for only $3.99. to keep up to date with what is coming up at the centre.
Joseph Denny, the coloured native of Barbados, was portrayed at the time as having intelligent features, and due to him wearing glasses, he presented himself as having a benign appearance. However, he was in fact a very habitual criminal who, at times, had a nasty habit of resorting to violence, with the Morning Post reporting on the 5th of February in 1881 that he had, and I quote,
"a very extraordinary career of crime,"
with a file consisting of 27 sheets. His first jail term was 6 months at Carmarthen Prison in South Wales for housebreaking. Then his next prison term was 7 years in Liverpool jail for manslaughter, and then a term of 8 years at Dartmoor for the crime of felony. It had been noted that during his 7-year sentence for manslaughter at the Liverpool jail, his conduct was so bad that he was required to serve the whole sentence with no remission for good behaviour. And during his term at Dartmoor, there were 124 breaches of discipline recorded against him, which resulted in many various forms of punishment that included solitary confinement and spells on a restricted diet, where he had been fed on nothing but bread and water for 720 days. It had been reported by the Times newspaper on the 5th of February in 1881 that Joseph Denny said, to possibly one of the prison guards at the time, and I quote, "Why don't you just send me to the gallows right away? I shall be sure to do something. I shall commit murder before I am done." On the 8th of January in 1889, Joseph Denny was released from Dartmoor Prison, after which he decided to join a ship and as a result, spent the next 9 months at sea. And then, a year later, during the summer of 1890, he travelled from London to Tavistock in Devon, where he was spotted on the streets with a troop of performing dogs. And with the help of the Duchy steward, a man named Mr. Barrington, Joseph Denny was able to secure a piece of land in Princetown, again in Devon, so that on the 15th of August in 1890 he was able to use this land for a stage show, and he presented his performing dogs to a small audience. Back at Dartmoor Prison, and the very next day, on the 16th of August in 1890, the then prison governor, Captain Oswald William Avery, was making his final inspection of the prison grounds for the day, when suddenly the sound of the clangorous alarm bells broke forth and disturbed the peaceful slumber within the prison walls. The purpose of these alarm bells was, of course, to give a warning of anybody who was trying to escape the prison, so a search party was put together immediately and an inspection of the prison grounds was put into action. On close inspection, the warders noticed a rope that was found inside one of the prison walls, and on an even closer inspection of the surrounding area, the warders then discovered a man hiding behind one of the toilets, which was next to the prison carpenter's workshop. And when the warders went to retrieve the somewhat surprised and slightly dishevelled man, they discovered that it was, very much to their surprise, none other than Joseph Denny, the same prisoner who had been set free from Dartmoor a year earlier. So, by all accounts, it looked like, well, it certainly did from the warders anyway, that Joseph Denny was actually attempting to break into Dartmoor Prison. It was reported at the time that in order to gain entry into Dartmoor Prison, Joseph Denny would have had to creep through the Deputy Governor's garden and then scale up the prison wall. However, unfortunately, when he dropped down on the other side of the prison wall, i.e. meaning the inside of the prison itself, he got his foot caught in the alarm wire, thus setting off the alarm bells. So we now ask ourselves, why would a man like Joseph Denny, a convicted felon and a man who had served his time and was now free, decide it would be a crackingly good idea to break into Dartmoor Prison? Well, it appears that when Joseph Denny was released from Dartmoor a year earlier and spent nearly a year at sea, he spent most of his time thinking and brooding about the cruel treatment that he had received from the chief warder at Dartmoor Prison called Augustus Hardy. So he decided what a great idea it would be to break into Dartmoor and murder the chief warder. Oh, and while he was there, he would also rescue 2 other prisoners. I suppose it must have been a case of killing 2 birds with 1 stone. But anyway, I digress. Initially, Joseph Denny refused to explain to the warders why he had broken into Dartmoor, but after a full body search revealed a knife and a box of matches, he then, realising that the game was up, said, and I quote, "I came to murder Flash Hardy, and murder him I will if I had got a chance." The name Flash Hardy was, in case you were wondering, the nickname that was given to the chief warder Augustus Hardy by the other warders and inmates at Dartmoor. Joseph Denny was then clapped in handcuffs, transported off, and was detained in the lockup. The following day, on the 17th of August in 1890, the prison chaplain decided to pay Joseph Denny a visit, and whilst visiting he was told by Denny that the reason for his attempted break-in at Dartmoor was to first set fire to the prison and then, once again confirming to the chaplain, that he was going to murder the chief warder Augustus Hardy. On that same morning of the 17th, one of the prison's farm workers discovered the carcass of a mutilated sheep which had not only been clearly clubbed to death, but also had a large piece of flesh carved out of its shoulder. And when Joseph Denny was questioned in regard to the dead sheep, he confessed to the crime, saying that, and I quote, "I have done 15 years for that old woman, and she should be able to stand a sheep or two now." When Joseph Denny talks about the old woman, he is in fact referring to Queen Victoria, who reigned from June 1837 during his time at Dartmoor until her death in January 1901. Later that same day, Joseph Denny was then transported to Tavistock, where he appeared before the local magistrate, a Mr. W.S. Rosevere, where he was then charged with breaking into Dartmoor Prison for an unlawful purpose, and being on prison premises for the purpose of setting fire to the building, and killing and stealing a sheep, which was the property of the prison authorities. The magistrate then remanded him in custody until the Tuesday of the 19th of August in 1890, and Joseph Denny was then escorted back to Princetown until his trial. After this second short break, in part 3 we will look at details regarding Joseph Denny's trial and how he expressed his feelings regarding the penal system.
Fright Nights was established in 1999 as the first company in the world to offer overnight ghost hunt experiences to the general public, pioneering paranormal events since the last century. Fright Nights operate at hundreds of the UK's most haunted and exclusive venues. All events have their own team of experienced paranormal investigators, mediums and psychics. They have a VIP members club for regular returning guests, offering loyalty discounts and exclusive invitation-only events. They can also host private events for your family and friends. You can contact them on 07 852 998 628 or email them at office@frightnights.co.uk. Or take a look at their website at www.frightnights.co.uk, where you can see the many locations they investigate and learn about them and the opportunities they have available. Hundreds of ghost hunters join Fright Nights every month for the most thrilling ghost hunting experiences they'll never forget. If you haven't been on a ghost hunt before, then why not join them to see what it's all about? Why not visit their social media sites for up-to-date information on all the places they visit and to see what's coming up in the future? They look forward to seeing you all soon. Fright Nights Ghost Hunting Events. Remember, only the original will do.
At Joseph Denny's trial, whilst he was in the dock, he was guarded by two surfboard Hercules-type warders, mainly because Chief Warder Augustus Hardy, Denny's alleged abuser, was also present in the courtroom, with it being reported at the time that Joseph Denny continuously glared at Chief Warder Hardy with a venom throughout the proceedings. So, no love lost there then. When Joseph Denny took to the stand, he began a tirade of grievances, claiming that when Chief Warder Hardy was appointed to Dartmoor Prison, he had been subjected to harsh treatment. Denny's claims included that he was often clapped in irons simply because, in his opinion, he was a man of colour and a plain speaker. And Joseph Denny then went on to explain that Chief Warder Hardy was in effect acting as not just the governor, but also the deputy governor, the doctor, the clergyman, and everything else in between. Joseph Denny then also noted that in all the prisons that he had been in, and at this stage in his criminal career, Denny had been in quite a few, he had never seen a governor delegate as much power to Chief Warder as that afforded to by Chief Warder Augustus Hardy. He then went on to list the numerous other punishments that he had received, and although in his opinion some were probably deserved, he also claimed that many of them were for no reason at all. Joseph Denny then added that he had been treated worse than a dog, and that ever since his release from Dartmoor Prison, the desire for payback was always with him. It is worth me pointing out here that throughout Joseph Denny's testimony, there were several occasions when the presiding judge had to step in and warn Denny to be very careful as to what he was saying. However, Joseph Denny's reply to this advice from the judge was that there was no way he was going to undergo penal servitude again, and that he was determined to speak his mind, regardless of the consequences. Joseph Denny then, with a slight touch of anger in his voice, went on to speak his mind and continued to explain as to what he was intending to do once he had successfully broken into Dartmoor Prison. Firstly, he was going to set fire to the building, thus giving the prisoners the opportunity to escape. Then he was going to lie in wait for Chief Warder Hardy, and once he had found him, he would then stab him to death. Joseph Denny then continued to say how he had no regard for the law and that he would have no peace of mind until Chief Warder Augustus Hardy was in his grave, adding that he would walk to the gallows with a contented mind if he could dispatch Hardy before he went. And then he finally pointed out to the court that if, and I quote, "if ever there was a hell, the Dartmoor Prison was that hell," followed by, and again I quote, "this was all the governor's fault, as he never looked into matters properly." The trial ended with Joseph Denny being committed for trial at the Assizes, and as he left the courtroom, he looked straight at Chief Warder Hardy and savagely hissed at him, saying, and I quote, "I shall remember you." On a short but interesting side note here, an assize is a court which formally sits at intervals in each county of England and Wales to administer civil and criminal law. In 1972, the civil jurisdiction of assizes was transferred to the High Court, and the criminal jurisdiction was transferred to the Crown Court. Following Joseph Denny's trial, he was then taken to Exeter Prison, and there he was kept under lock and key until the 2nd of December in 1890 for his Devon Assizes trial. Whilst incarcerated at Exeter Prison, Joseph Denny confessed to 1. having previously murdered a woman in Hull, and 2. that he was suspected of the gruesome crimes that had recently taken place in the east of London. Which, just in case you weren't too sure as to what gruesome crimes he was referring to, he was of course talking about the Whitechapel murders that were committed by Jack the Ripper. His comments and confessions regarding these crimes were reported to both the county police and the Home Secretary. However, no evidence was ever found to link him to the woman in Hull or the Whitechapel murders. But despite Joseph Denny's unproven confessions and his strange demeanour during his stay at Exeter Prison, the prison officials were convinced that he was hiding something that was related to some horrific crime somewhere. Joseph Denny's Devon Assizes trial was held on the 2nd of December in 1890 at Exeter Castle before Judge Grantham, and when he was presented with the convictions that the court held against him, he denied them all by saying that he had been mistaken for his brother. At the trial, Denny's alleged abuser, Chief Warder Augustus Hardy, was called to give evidence. However, throughout Hardy's testimony, Joseph Denny continuously barged in, complaining of the cruel treatment that he received by the Chief Warder at Dartmoor. However, regardless of Denny's heckling, Chief Warder Augustus Hardy explained to the court how he had nothing to do with Joseph Denny's treatment, as his duties were merely to ensure reports were logged, and that he, meaning Denny of course, was never involved in any arguments or adjudications. When it came to Joseph Denny's turn to address the court, instead of the angry, resentful young man from his first trial, this time he broke down in tears. Whilst in the stand, he confessed that he had harboured a grudge towards Chief Warder Augustus Hardy, but at the time he was in a passionate rage. But now he was just at the court begging for mercy, saying that he was just a coloured man far from his distant homeland. However, Judge Grantham was having none of it, and was not swayed by the pitiful display put on by Joseph Denny, and instead sentenced him to 12 months' hard labour. So it was back to Dartmoor Prison for Denny. After a time, Joseph Denny was then removed from Dartmoor Prison and relocated to the Broadmoor Lunatic Asylum, and then when he was released on a ticket of leave back into society, he ended up living in Southampton. But it wasn't long when, on the 1st of December in 1891, that he was once again back before a police court, charged with stealing a coat which was worth 19 shillings, which in today's money is worth about 5 English pence. It was reported, whilst at the police court, that although he was very respectfully dressed for the occasion, this did not stop Joseph Denny presenting the court with a 90-minute condemnation regarding the horrors of the penal system, with, as you could probably imagine, most of his recounting involving the treatment whilst at Dartmoor, with him also stating to the court that, and I quote, "A grave would be better for me now, and you won't get me back to Dartmoor, to Broadmoor Criminal Asylum. You will get my dead body first." And that he just wanted to go back to his native country of Barbados. Needless to say, Joseph Denny's speech had very little effect on the magistrates at the court, and so he was sent for trial at his next assizes. And after a, what you could probably imagine by now, violent struggle trying to get Denny back into a police cell, he was then placed under 24-hour suicide watch, as it was thought that he may actually try to commit suicide. In the end, Joseph Denny ended up with a further 9 months prison sentence, which was to be followed by a 5-year supervision order, which meant that he always had to report his whereabouts to law enforcement. A few years later, in 1895, it was discovered that a new theatrical show called Uncle Tom's Cabin was being performed in Bishop Auckland in Durham, and that they had employed a coloured man by the name of Joseph Hedley Denny. But, once again, in the October of that same year, he was back before the courts, this time on the charge of stealing and wearing apparel from the house where he was lodging. And while the police searched his digs, they also found items that just so happened to be stolen from various rooms within the lodging home, including a fur tippet, a silk handkerchief, a woolen shirt, woolen linings, a muffler, woolen gloves, cuffs, a hairbrush and a hat brush, which, when all valued together, came to the grand total of £2 5 which in today's money is worth £184.61. But despite all the items of theft that were found in his room, Joseph Denny's main concern was what effect those charges would have had on his supervision order. However, he didn't have to wait too long for his answer, as he was given a further 6 months' imprisonment. I'm afraid there is very little to none at all when it comes to any information as to what happened to our hero, Joseph Denny, after his 1895 incarceration. It has been suggested that he did eventually die in prison, and personally, after looking at his track record, I feel that this was probably more than likely the case. However, as there is no evidence either way to back up this claim, his sudden disappearance is somewhat a bit of a mystery.
Thank you all for taking the time out to listen to this episode of Mark's Unexplained World. In our next episode, show number 149, we are going to be looking at the vanishing and reappearance of Catherine Van Alst. While on holiday with her family at Devil's Den State Park, Arkansas, Catherine Von Alst wandered away from her brothers whilst they were fishing near a creek. Then, in the blink of an eye, Catherine suddenly vanished, and despite the cries of her family, who were desperately trying to find her, she failed to respond and had completely disappeared. Then, after 6 days of park rangers and volunteers searching the area, as quickly as she disappeared, she reappeared, safe and well.
This show was written and researched by myself, Mark Hughes, and proofread and edited by Linda Hughes. The pronunciations, of course, were all mine. The actors in this episode were Mark Hughes, Linda Hughes and Denise Pooler, with special thanks to Neil Packer and the staff at the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre in Hinckley. And of course a big thank you to everyone for listening. We never run out of ideas here at the office for Mark's Unexplained World podcast, but if you know of any other intriguing stories under the Unexplained banner, including ufology, hauntings, disasters and any other sort of paranormal phenomena, as well as true crime, unsolved crime and missing people, just drop me a direct message and I'll see what I can do. I will also include the name of the person who suggested the idea in the end credits of the podcast, if they're happy for me to do so, of course. And again, just to add, if you are listening to this show on YouTube, please give us a review and a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And if you are listening on any of the other podcast platforms, again, give us a like and a follow. I thank you in advance. Mark's Unexplained World, because there's more to the paranormal than meets the third eye. And remember guys, keep it real, because being real is better than being perfect. This show and all its contents are covered by basic copyright of Mark the Medium.